What's up everyone, MikeSytes here, and this is what you've been waiting for, 60 of the best questions for the Part 107 exam. This is a test prep study guide with the answers so you'll be able to pass with the highest score possible. And all of the questions will have detailed explanations and will also be referenced directly from the FAA website. So you already know this information is entirely accurate. So go get your testing supplement pencils and papers. Are you ready? Let's go. The first question is about FAA registration weight requirements. Which of the following unmanned aircraft requires registration under FAA Part 107? The multiple choice answers are on screen, so you'll be able to choose the correct one. And at the very bottom, I will be posting a hint, so you'll be able to choose the correct answer. And you can pause the video at any time, so that way you'll be able to write down your answer and check it in the video description. Now, I've read the question, now let's take a look at the answers. And don't let this fool you, because although it seems to be simple in both the question and the answers, this is the one you're going to get wrong because you already think you know the answer and you actually don't. Get this in your head. 0.55 pounds does not equal 250 grams. Okay, let me say this another way. 250 grams is a little bit over 0.55 pounds. The FAA's threshold, or their starting point for when you need to register a drone, is 250 grams. Now, on their website, it mentions 250 grams specifically, but that means you must register all drones except for those that weigh less than 250 grams, or should I say, except for those that weigh 0.55 pounds or less. And the reason that they posted it that way is because 0.55 pounds actually equals 249.48 grams. And that's why these companies such as DJI built these drones that say 249 grams, so that way you wouldn't need to have it registered with the FAA. So if you're looking at 0.55 pounds, it does not need to be registered. It's only if it's more than 0.55 pounds. And if you're looking at 250 grams, well, any drone that weighs 250 grams, which does not equal 0.55 pounds, it's more than 0.55 pounds, must be registered at 250 grams, and anything less than 250 grams, you do not have to have it registered with the FAA. So going back to the answers, there's only one that's correct, and that is C, all drones except for those that weigh 0.55 pounds or less. Let me give you a quick memorization tool. The FAA prefers using the word less more than they do prefer using the word more. 0.55 pounds or less, less than 250 grams, less than 55 pounds. You see how that works? So just remember that the word less is what you're referring to, and you won't have a problem with this question. Now, before we go deep into this video, I want to give you a brief introduction to the Part 107 exam. Information that is very important, because without you knowing exactly why you're taking this exam, then it may not motivate you enough to study well enough to pass the exam. Touching on what a remote pilot certification is, who needs it, and why the FAA actually requires it. So what exactly is Part 107? Well, it's the Federal Aviation Administration's set of rules to govern commercial operations of drones within the United States. And when you hear those words, commercial operations, well, that means anytime that you're flying your drone for compensation or business purposes, or even if it's doing a YouTube video and you want to just show your aerial footage and YouTube is paying you because your channel is monetized. Well, in that situation, you'll need to get a driver's license for the sky, or should I say a remote pilot certificate. Now, there are some of you who just want to fly for fun or recreationally. Well, you can do that, but only if your drone weighs 0.55 pounds or less. And do you see why I put that at the beginning of the video? If you're flying your drone for fun, or should I say recreationally, there are two things that you need to be concerned about. The first thing is that your drone does not weigh 250 grams or more. And if it does weigh 250 grams or more, you need to register that drone with the FAA. The second thing is that you cannot fly your drone until you pass the Recreational UAS Safety Test, or TRUST for short. It's an online test that you can take, and there are quite a few FAA-approved online administrators where you can take that test, and once you pass the TRUST test, you'll be able to print out your little certificate with your operator's number on it. A lot of people who fly drones recreationally are not even aware of what I just mentioned to you. And in fact, a lot of them don't even know that the FAA even exists. So you can see just how important this introduction actually is. Now, some of you may be asking, why does the FAA even care about me flying my drone? I have a very small mini drone. I'm only flying it in my backyard. I'm not carrying any payload or passengers. And it's not like I'm flying an airplane, right? Well, point well taken. But there's one thing that you're failing to understand. A drone is an aircraft, and it is highly capable of flying well above 400 feet above the ground. And if that's the situation, then that means this is not a toy. It's like saying that you own a Formula One racing car and you're only going to drive it around a Walmart parking lot. You're going to hurt somebody no matter what. A drone is capable at flying at the same altitude as a commercial airliner. So understanding a drone's capabilities also allows you to understand the FAA's reasoning for rules and regulations. During the course of this video, there will be brief intermission periods where I will give you more information on Part 107. Let's get into the next question. Number 2 is another registration weight requirement question. And I want you to refer back to what it is that you already learned. Which of the following small unmanned aircraft requires registration under FAA Part 107? So based on what you've previously learned, do you see something that's just standing out? You see the word less, am I right? But you also see the word under 55 pounds. I threw those two answers in just as a diversion. And this is what the FAA does. They want to distract you from the correct answer. But read the answer carefully. C says all drones except for those that are under 55 pounds. And we know that's not true because any drone that is under 55 pounds needs to be registered with the FAA. So the only correct answer here will be B, a drone that weighs less than 55 pounds. Now you notice here on the hint that I put a drone weighing 56 pounds is not Part 107. I put that in there for you to understand that a drone that weighs more than 55 pounds is not Part 107, but more importantly, a drone that weighs exactly 55 pounds is also not Part 107. The correct terminology here in regard to the FAA Part 107 exam is the word less. It must weigh less than 55 pounds. Now, the reason that I prioritized these two questions first is because 55% of you answered this question incorrectly on the quizzes that I was posting, and the polls gave me a number that said 55% answered this incorrectly. So now that you understand this, I've explained it to you. Let's make sure that these two questions we answer 100% correctly on the Part 107 exam. And since we're on the topic of drone registration, let me ask you about the expiration date of how long does a drone registration remain valid. And you notice that I have not posted the answers, and that's because I want you to be able to answer the question immediately. You see, whenever it is that you have to think about an answer, that means that you have not fully studied the material. You see, if I met you on a street corner and asked you this question, you should be able to answer that question in the same exact way if I asked you how old you were. This is how you know that you have mastered a certain topic. So practice this philosophy. For every question that you are asked, provide a quick and confident answer. And even if your answer is incorrect, you still retained the philosophy. So what is your answer in regard to this question? Well, here are your choices, A, B, and C. And if you're still having a question in your head that you're not sure of what the answer is, then that means that you need to go back and study the material more thoroughly. Because I don't just want to give you the answer, I want you to know the answer before I give it to you. Where most of you will make your mistake is thinking that this drone registration actually is the same exact thing as your remote pilot certification, and that is not correct. Think of this as something being similar as your car registration as opposed to your driver's license. They're both going to be different, right? The car needs to be registered each year, but your driver's license may not need to be renewed until 5 years. But the mistake that you'll be making in regard to focusing on the question is that they're referring to the registration of a drone, but you're reading the question so quickly and you're not really having a solid grip on understanding what it is that they're asking you. Take your time, have patience, read the question again, and you'll understand that the correct answer here can only be B. The number of years that a registration is valid for a drone registration is 3 years. Now, taking a break just to explain something to you just for a moment, I'm not just trying to give you the answers by explaining all of this. I'm not just trying to tell you what questions are going to be on the exam. What I'm trying to do is to help you to build a methodology, a philosophy of being able to study and practice, so that way you'll be able to approach this in the correct way. It may not be the material that you're having difficulty with. It may be just the method that you're using to actually study for the exam. So allow me to help you in this way, and you might just walk away with something that you wouldn't have been able to get anywhere else. Question number 4, let's talk about remote identification, authorization without RID. And you see how I just circumvented that? I don't even have to explain what RID stands for. And again, I'm not showing you the answers because this is something that you should already know at the top of your head, and paying attention to the key words in the question, which operating condition. So, I'm thinking, what possible operating condition could I possibly have that would allow me to fly this drone without remote ID? Let's see. It's not about authorization. It's not about equipment failure. It's not about my grandmother flying the drone. It's something that I remember reading before and I studied. Okay, so I'm putting the answers on screen. Tell me, what is it that you remember either reading or studying about the operation of a drone that does not require remote ID? And here again, the FAA will try to trick you by keeping the answers relatively close. And notice how creative these answers are. Let's go over A. If the operation is being flown within visual line of sight, well, that could be a reason why I don't need remote ID because I can see the drone. No, that's not it. You must always have visual line of sight. B. The operation's being flown in a FRIA beyond visual line of sight. Well, I know that a FRIA allows me to fly a drone without remote ID, but also in a FRIA, you must keep the drone within visual line of sight. So that's not it. So just by process of elimination alone, answer C, if the operation is being conducted for aeronautical research. Now, I do believe I read that somewhere. But the question here is, were you able to find this information? And I'm going to put the information up on screen right now so you can see it. Under the Code of Federal Regulations, you can see that this remote ID identification of an unmanned aircraft does not fall under Part 107. It actually falls under Part 89. Part 89 was proposed and established exclusively for remote ID. And the subpart section that I'm looking for is 89.120. And look, there it is, operations of aeronautical research or to show compliance with regulations. And you can see clearly that it says the administrator may authorize operations without remote ID identification where the operation is solely for the purpose of aeronautical research or to show compliance with regulations. And it's very easy for teachers, presenters, or creators to actually read these words to you as you're actually seeing it, but the difficulty comes when they're trying to explain it to you. So I'm going to explain it to you. Aeronautical research is the testing, studying, and developing of technology. And the other part was to show compliance with regulations. Well, that's if a drone manufacturer is doing some testing and they need to fly the drone temporarily without remote ID in order to meet FAA compliance. So going back to the question now, do you have any doubt in your mind as to which answer would be appropriate for this question? No, you don't, because you now have an alternative method of being able to study and research the information so you can answer these questions quickly and confidently. Number 5, your pre-flight inspection checklist. Now, here's the question. Under 14 CFR Part 107, the responsibility to inspect the Small Unmanned Aircraft System, SUAS, to ensure safe operation condition is the responsibility of. And you notice that I put the word responsibility twice in this question. And the reason for that is so you remember that the R word is related to the remote pilot in command. The RPIC is responsible for everything having to do with the operation of a drone. Question number 6 is about airspace classification, particularly about Class E airspace. Question: a shaded magenta boundary on a sectional chart identifies the floor of Class E airspace will begin at Now look at the answers. Do you see how I have both AGL and MSL as your answer choices? And that's because most of you do not know if Class E airspace should be measured in AGL or MSL, or if there's some point where Class E airspace is referenced with both AGL and MSL. So let's clear this up so everything is understood. We're looking at figure 23, sectional chart excerpt, and let's go over to the right to Savannah Hilton Head International Airport. So give me an immediate answer. What class of airspace is that airport currently in? Now don't be intimidated just because you see faded magenta lines on the outer circle. This airport is controlled airspace Class C as indicated with the solid magenta lines around the airport. But the faded magenta lines are significant for Class E airspace. So what does this all mean? Well, let's break it down. Look at the sectional chart and try to imagine or visualize all of those layers on a three-dimensional platform. But it's difficult to do that, so I took the time to draw everything out for you so you can see it clearly. Notice that I drew the airport runways at surface level SFC, and this is Class C airspace that extends up to 4,100 feet MSL. Now going back to the sectional chart, you see it's clearly indicated by the numbers 41 over SFC. This is the inner layer of Class C airspace. And also notice that the outer layer is at the same altitude MSL, and that's also indicated on the sectional chart as you see 41 over 13, which actually means the ceiling of that outer layer Class C is at 4,100 feet MSL, and the floor of that outer layer is 1,300 feet MSL. Now going back to the sectional chart, you see that the faded magenta Class E is under the outer layer of Class C. And you know the floor of the Class C airspace outer layer is at 1,300 feet MSL, so that means that Class E airspace will go up to, but not including, 1,299 feet MSL. But as a rule, faded magenta boundaries of Class E airspace will always begin at 700 feet AGL. And the reason it's AGL here is because directly below Class E is Class G airspace, and Class G airspace is always referenced in AGL above ground level. And the reason for that is because everything starts at the surface when you're talking about Class G airspace. So this gives you a visual impression of exactly what's happening here with Class E airspace and how it can change from AGL to MSL. But going back to the question on where a faded magenta Class E actually begins, it will always begin at 700 feet AGL. Question number 7 has to do with the sectional chart airspace altitudes you'll need your Airman Knowledge Testing Supplement, or just follow along with the video. Refer to figure 25, area 4. What is the base altitude of Class B airspace directly over Hicks Airport? And notice that I'm giving you a hint at the very bottom, but let's pull up the sectional chart to see what's going on. And we're looking for area 4 Hicks T67. Now this is actually not an airport, this is an airfield. It's privately owned, and you can see that the symbol of the airport is a magenta color, and that means that it's a non-towered airport. Now the question is asking, what is the base altitude of the Class B airspace that is directly above Hicks Airfield? So what you'll need to do here is to identify Class B airspace as the solid blue lines and stay within the walls of those blue lines until you find a base altitude for Class B airspace. Now you see, as I'm scouting around and I'm looking, I find 110 over 40, and that's at the very bottom. That is the base altitude for Class B airspace for that particular layer that is directly over Hicks Airport. And going back to the question and answers, you see that I have two that are possible choices: B, 4,000 feet AGL, or C, 4,000 feet MSL. This is the weak link in the chain. This is where you'll make your mistake, because if you're not paying attention and you failed to remember that Class B airspace is only referenced in MSL, then you won't be able to answer this question correctly. The correct answer is C, 4,000 feet MSL. Question number 8, another sectional chart question for airspace classification. Let's see what this one is asking. Refer to figure 74, area 6. What airspace is Hayward Executive executive in. And for this one, I want you to pay close attention to the sectional chart I'm about to pull up, because you're going to be able to avoid making a big mistake on this one. So here we are, charts up, and we're looking for Area 6. And what I see directly to the left of that Area 6 ball is an airport. And directly under that airport is the airport data or information on Hayward Executive. But red light, stop, look around. Is that actually Hayward Executive Airport? Stop for a moment and focus on the sectional chart and look around to make sure and confirm that that is Hayward Executive before you actually make your decision. And as you can see, there is another airport just to the right of the airport information or the airport data. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is Hayward Executive HWD. The reason I wanted you to focus on this is because whenever you're looking at a sectional chart, you need to take the time to focus in and make sure that you're confirming all of the information for exactly what it is that you're looking at. And when I zoom in closer, you can clearly see that there are dashed blue lines around Hicks Executive HWD, and that would indicate that we're looking at Class D airspace. So let's go to the next question, sectional charts, and stay on Hayward Executive just for a moment. The question here is, what is the ceiling of Class D airspace at Hayward Executive Airport? And again, I'm holding off on posting the answers so that way you'll have a chance to actually look at the sectional chart first. And here we go. Do you see a 15 with a box around it with a minus sign directly to the left? Well, that symbol is in your legend. It's a very important symbol for pilots because when they see that, they automatically know that that is Class D airspace. And the number 15 stands for 1,500 feet, but there's a minus sign next to it. So what that means is that they can go all the way up close to 1,500 feet, but they can't touch it. They have to stay at 1,499 feet MSL. And those are some good tips for you to remember. Let's move to the next question. Number 10, latitude and longitude coordinates. Refer to Figure 20, Area 3. What is the latitude and longitude coordinates for Elizabeth City CGAS Regional Airport? Now I'm displaying the multiple choice answers on screen, but you'll need your testing supplement to determine what the correct answer actually is. And you see also that I'm giving you a hint that the airport is north of the equator and south of 37 degrees. That's a dead giveaway. But let me take you step by step through the actual conversion of all of these coordinates so that way you'll know exactly how to do this on the Part 107 exam. So here we are on a sectional chart and you can see Elizabeth City Regional, and in regard to latitude and longitude, well, you can see the latitude and longitude lines, but there are no numbers by degrees, so we have to go and find them. Every sectional chart in your testing supplement will have a set of numbers by degrees, latitude and longitude. And just so that we're clear on the same page, you do know that latitude lines are the ones that are flat, running from east to west, and the longitude lines are the ones that are going vertically up and down, north and south. But by saying that, let me clarify something that may be very confusing to you. You see, the latitude lines are flat, and you see them running from east to west, right? But when we're talking about latitude lines, they are measured by degrees north and south from the equator. And in a similar manner, longitude lines are measured by degrees east and west from the prime meridian. So let's go ahead and find these coordinates that should be on this sectional chart. You see, I'm looking at them right now. 37 degrees latitude and 76 degrees longitude. Now, it's crucial to be able to find these coordinates because this is what's going to allow you to find certain things on this particular sectional chart. So let's start with the latitude coordinate first, 37 degrees. And by saying that, you will always see degrees that are written or degrees that are being presented to you will always start with the latitude coordinate first. And that means it will have either a capital N or a capital S for north or south from the equator. And the best way I can tell you to do this is simply just to write down these coordinates on a piece of paper while you're trying to find that airport. So start from 37 degrees and go south to the 30-minute marker, which should be 36 degrees 30 minutes. And the next line of latitude that will be south of that marker will be exactly 36 degrees. But we're not going that far south because the airport is just north of that. So what you'll be doing is counting down from that 30-minute marker, for example, 29, 28, 27, 26, 25, all the way down to 16 minutes, which lines up with the airport laterally. So I know that I'm at 36 degrees, 16 minutes. Now let's go to the longitude. The longitude line just east of the airport is at 76 degrees. I already know that. So start counting to the east, and you should find that you are at 76 degrees, 10 minutes. So just from memory in my head, without looking at the answers, I already know that I am north 36 degrees, 16 minutes, west 76 degrees, 10 minutes. And that coincides with the correct answer, which is A, north 36 degrees, 16 minutes, west 76 degrees, 10 minutes. Now, with the breakdown and explanation of this question, you should not have any problems finding a coordinate on a sectional chart when it comes time to taking the Part 107 exam. Now, for those of you who'd like to do something for this channel, smash that like button until you can't smash it anymore, okay? Let's move to the next question. Number 11, airport signs, and we're referring to runway markers. And the question is, numbers 9 and 27 on an airport runway indicate that the runway is oriented approximately. Now, here are the answers A, B, and C. Look them over, but there's one thing that you need to be concerned about is whether or not you understand what true actually means and magnetic actually means. Because if you don't know the difference, then you have a 50-50% chance of getting this question correct. So let me explain what this is before you actually try to answer this question. True settings are based on a physical point of reference, such as the North Pole. So if you're walking, driving, or you're on a boat, then you would look for a true heading, which is a physical reference. And here's something that you may not be aware of. A boat or a ship can use either true headings or magnetic headings. But when we're referring to a pilot who's flying a plane and trying to navigate based on their instruments, well, instruments are not able to determine true physical references. The compass in the cockpit of a plane will detect and only align with the Earth's magnetic field. So sectional charts are published to match these compass settings, and also runways are labeled so that way they align with the magnetic headings that allow the pilots to navigate without error. So now let's go back to the question. Do you feel confident that you'll be able to answer this question now that you understand about true and magnetic headings? You know what? Answer this question without hesitation, because there's only one correct answer. And that's because in the multiple choices, there's only one that says magnetic. And if this question was on the Part 107 exam in this way, you wouldn't even have to think about it. There's only one correct answer, and that is magnetic. The runways 9 and 27 are both oriented at 90 degrees and 270 degrees magnetic. Let's go to the next question. Number 12 is a question about airport traffic patterns. Now, this is very important to understand. Here's the question. An aircraft announces that they are on short final of runway 9. Where is the aircraft in relation to the airport? This is a typical Part 107 exam question. And before you can answer this question correctly, you need to know two things: airport traffic patterns and runway headings. Now, we just went over runway headings, so you're already an expert, but you may not be aware of airport traffic patterns, so I'm going to break it down right now. Here is an example of two airport traffic patterns, the top being a left-hand traffic pattern and the bottom being a right-hand traffic pattern. And I'm going to roll this little blue ball onto this diagram so that way you know where the airport is located in relation to the runways. Now, you should immediately notice that on the left-hand traffic pattern at the top that all of the airplanes are making left-hand turns. And then you should notice that on the bottom for the right-hand traffic pattern that all of the airplanes are making right-hand turns. And each one of these turns is called a leg. So you have the crosswind leg, you have the downwind leg, you have the base leg, the final approach leg, and then the departure leg. And pay close attention, you also have a point of entry, and that will always be at a 45-degree angle into the traffic pattern. All of this information is significant in you understanding exactly what traffic pattern you're dealing with. So now let's go back to the question and take a look at the key words. Short final of runway 9. Whenever a pilot says that, that is the direction that they're heading in magnetically. So what are you going to do now? Of course, we're going to draw a compass, and we're going to put on that compass 90 degrees. And look, you don't even have to draw that compass because I just rolled one in for you. 90 degrees means that the direction the plane is traveling is east. And regardless of whether this is a left-hand or right-hand traffic pattern, the plane is just west of the runway. And by knowing that, you also know that the correct answer is C, west of the airport. And the key thing to remember here is that the number of the runway is where the airplane is heading towards. Question number 13 is about symbols and colors on a sectional chart. Here's the question. What is the difference between an airport symbol colored blue and an airport symbol colored in magenta? And I'm referring to what the colors actually mean. Now look at answer choice A. Blue means class B and magenta means class C. Now this is the typical well thought out wrong answer. Don't laugh. You'll be surprised at how many people would actually choose A. B is another well thought out wrong answer. Blue stands for bigger airports. Magenta stands for smaller airports. Remember, we're not referring to airspace classification here. We're only referring to the colors of the symbols of the airports. And now that you know that both A and B are incorrect, well, the correct answer is C. Blue means there is a control tower, whereas magenta would mean that there is not a control tower at the airport. And it's important to remember that the color of the symbol that's being provided for the airport does not necessarily need to match or be the same as the airspace classification of the airport. It's only relating to the presence of a control tower. Now, just on a quick note before I move to the next question, I wanted to give you these random questions because this will simulate the way that you're going to be receiving these questions on the actual Part 107 exam. This methodology is not usually presented in this way, but I believe that it's going to be effective for you since you're receiving the information randomly and you will be taking the exam with random questions also. So let's move to the next random question. 14, weather, atmospheric conditions. And here's the question. Every physical process of weather is accompanied by or is a result of a what? Now, this is a question that you would have either had to have read something or someone told you or you studied it somewhere, because without that information, you would not be able to answer this question correctly. But you see that I'm giving you a hint at the very bottom. What is it that has the most impact on the Earth's surface? Now, some of you already know the answer and some of you have absolutely no clue. So for those of you who are scratching your head and your eyeballs are burning, let me give you the straight answer. The sun has the most amount of impact on the Earth's surface. And what is it that the sun provides? Well, it provides sunlight. And this sunlight is also felt as heat. And as the heat strikes the Earth's uneven surface, it causes temperature differences to develop. And these temperature differential causes air to move. Convection begins, and the warm air begins to rise as cooler air begins to descend. And when that happens, you have the creation of high pressure and low pressure. And then the convection begins to have cloud formations, and the cloud formations turn into storm developments. And all of this subsequently occurring from the sun's impact on the Earth's surface. What do you think the correct answer should be here? Is it A, movement of air, B, heat exchange, or C, pressure differential? Well, there's only one correct answer here because two of the other choices are caused by the one. And in case you're still not sure, the correct answer is B, heat exchange. All of these atmospheric events occur in sequence, all because of the sun's heat on the Earth's surface. Question number 15, weather, clouds, and storms. Here's the question. What are the three stages of a thunderstorm? Now, if you have to think about it, it's because you didn't study the material. But I'm going to give you a freebie on this one. Freebie meaning B is the answer. Cumulus stage, mature stage, dissipating stage. Those are the three stages of a thunderstorm. And here's the quick and concise breakdown. The cumulus stage is when the clouds are building because of warm air rising. The mature stage is when you have updrafts and downdrafts, and there's lightning and hail, and this is the most dangerous part of the storm. And the dissipating stage is when you no longer have warm air rising, you just have cool air descending and the cloud is starting to dissipate. Do you see how I just broke that down so you know the correct answer is B, cumulus, mature, and dissipating? Next question, number 16, is density, altitude, and this has to do with propeller performance. Now try saying that 5 times fast. What effect does a low density altitude have on the efficiency of an SUAS propeller? Now I'm not posting the answers yet because I want to ask you this question. Do Do you know the answer to this question? Now, my mom always used to ask me, Mike, why is it that you ask a question that you already know the answer to? And I would say, Mom, it's not because I'm looking for the answer. It's because I'm looking for confirmation of the answer for what I already know. This is the approach. You should already know the answer to this question before this question was even asked. So let's throw the multiple choices on screen. A, propeller efficiency will be decreased. B, propeller efficiency will be increased. Or C, density altitude has no effect on propeller performance. Now I'm going to ask this question one more time. Do you know the answer to this question? And here's my confirmation. You don't know because you're still watching this video. You see, the one most important key element that you don't have in this question or the answers is something that's telling you that density altitude is not really about altitude. It's about how the aircraft feels at a certain altitude. For example, we're not talking about how high the aircraft is or low the aircraft is. We're talking about the pressure around the aircraft, the temperature, the humidity. All of these elements, excluding the altitude, will affect the performance of the propeller and the aircraft. So you can see now that it doesn't have anything to do with the altitude. It has to do with how the aircraft feels. Now listen to the logic of how I explain this to you. Hot, high humidity air has less air molecules in it. So that means that there's less air to move. So the air is naturally thinner. And that means that there's more heat and moisture molecules than there is air. So it has a higher density at a certain altitude. And it doesn't matter what altitude you're at. You could be on top of Mount Sinai or below the Grand Canyon. It's the way the aircraft feels at a certain density at a certain altitude. Are you starting to get this? Do you have confirmation? So let's go back to the question. A low density altitude will have what type of effect on a propeller? You got it. It will increase the propeller efficiency. And just to go a little bit above and beyond, air density is determined by pressure, temperature, and humidity. So the thrust that you're going to be able to develop on an aircraft or drone is directly proportional to that density. Now let me break away for a moment to give you some information about the FAA exam registration procedure. Now before you can obtain your Part 107 remote pilot certificate, you'll need to register with the FAA to get your FAA tracking number or FTN. This is how the FAA will know that you've scheduled an exam, and they will also track the results of that exam so that way they can issue your remote pilot certificate. If you go to iacra.faa.gov, that's where you'll be able to register to get your number. And once you have that unique number, that's when you'll be able to go to PSI services and schedule your exam. And there are testing centers and facilities all over the United States. A lot of them are found close or within airports. And you'll be able to select a preferred date of when you want to take the exam. Now, just take it from me, a little bit of advice. It's probably better to schedule the exam after you've been studying for it, because who knows when you're going to be able to absorb or retain the information, right? But if you have any questions at all, you can always send me a comment and I'll do my best to answer. Okay, moving to the next question, aircraft factors. This is for load factor calculations, something that is very, very important to understand for the Part 107 exam. So here's the question. Refers to figure 2. An aircraft weighs 45 pounds, total weight of the aircraft. What would the G-force be on the aircraft in a 45-degree angle of bank? Now, even if I put the multiple choice answers on screen, you're still going to have a 33% chance of getting this right if you're trying to do this in your head. And you still won't be able to get it right because you don't have the load factor conversion chart to properly calculate and determine what the G-forces are on the aircraft when it's making a 45-degree bank turn. So here's the chart on screen. So let's go through this. And keep this in the back of your head. The aircraft weighs 45 pounds. Now, what we're concerned about right now is that it's making a 45-degree banked turn. So the bank angle, or the angle of bank, should I say, is 45 degrees. Now stay with me on this. Look at the chart and find 45 degrees for the angle of bank. And just to the right of that, you'll see a number for load factor, and that number is 1.414. And that number also corresponds to what you see on the chart where you look at 45 degrees for the bank angle. Go up a little bit and you'll see the line is touching on 1.414 approximately. Now, since you've already placed a number in the back of your head, and that was 45 pounds, you also have another number, and that's 1.414. Take those two numbers, 45 pounds and 1.414, and multiply them to see what your answer is. And if the calculation is correct, you should get answer C, 63.6 pounds, as the load factor or G-forces that are on the aircraft at a 45-degree angle of bank. Next question, 18, FAA rules and regulations for accident reporting. Here's the question. A small UA causes an accident and your crew member loses consciousness. When do you report the accident? Now, if you've never seen this question before, you're going to have a 33.3% chance of answering correctly. Those are not very good odds when you're taking the Part 107 exam. There are certain things that you must commit to memory. So let me show you how I commit things to memory in a funny way so I'll remember. And try not to laugh too hard at these jokes, okay? When your drone puts some poor old lady in the hospital, well, the FAA knows that you're going to spend the first 9 days blaming the wind. So they give you an extra day so that way you can report it within 10 days. That was good, right? Let me give you another one. The FAA gives you 10 days to report an accident because they know from day one that you'll still be yelling at the DJI customer service. One more. Why 10 days? It's because the FAA knows that for the first week, you're still trying to figure out how to get that drone out of your neighbor's tree. You know I'm right on all counts, right? Well, all joking aside, the correct answer is C, within 10 days of the accident. Now, do you think you will ever forget that question? I don't think so. Let's move to the next question. FAA registration age requirements. Did you know that if you're over the age of 55 that you can't register a drone? I'm just kidding. Let's go to the question. According to 14 CFR Part 48, when can a person register a small UA with the Federal Aviation Administration? Now, this is a fairly simple question, but the reason that I threw this one in the mix is because most of you are not aware of the fact that a drone registration that doesn't have anything to do with commercial operation of a drone is Part 48. You see, a 13-year-old can register a drone, but not under Part 107, which is basically intended for commercial use. A remote pilot certification is under Part 107, and a 13-year-old cannot be a remote pilot or certified as a remote pilot. A remote pilot must be at least 16 years of age. But by saying this, I don't want you to confuse the registration of a drone with the certification of becoming a remote pilot. The answer is B. 13 years of age is when you can register a drone, and when that 13-year-old decides that they want to obtain a remote pilot certificate, well, they'll have to wait until they're 16. Next question, number 20, Civil Twilight Operational Requirements. And here's the question. According to 14 CFR Part 107, what is required to operate a small UA within 30 minutes after official sunset? Now, even if you've never studied this question, it's a logical question because the words implying are after official sunset, which leads you to believe that since it's going to get darker, that lights must be required. So the correct answer here is B, use of anti-collision lights. But the reason that I put this question on the board is because there are some elements or components that are missing in the answer. First, let me show you something directly from the FAA website that confused me when I was studying for the Part 107 exam. This is in regard to operating requirements of a drone. Now, if you notice just below, I highlighted this section. I'm going to read it to you. You can fly during daylight 30 minutes before official sunset to 30 minutes after official sunset, local time. And get this, pay attention. Or, you see that word? Or in twilight if your drone has anti-collision lighting. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that somebody goofed on this FAA publication, don't you think? Because it doesn't make any sense. They published the definition of the word daylight as the same definition as you would have for civil twilight. Do you see why it's so difficult to study for this exam? Not even the FAA can get it right, and I know they're probably mad at me right now, but I don't care. I am sure that I'm probably the only content creator that's ever pointed this out. So what I do is go directly to the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 107.29, and you'll see that not only do they provide you with the accurate nomenclature for the statute, but they also give you information about those missing components that I just mentioned. Let me read this to you straight from the good horse's mouth. No person may operate a small unmanned aircraft system during the periods of civil twilight unless the small unmanned aircraft has lighted anti-collision lighting visible for at least 3 statute miles and has a flash rate sufficient to avoid collision. Now, when I took my Part 107 exam, I did not remember reading anything about a flash rate for anti-collision lights, but this is why I'm telling it to you now, because if you see that on the Part 107 exam, remember that the anti-collision lights must have a flash rate or they must strobe. And I hope that the FAA doesn't come after me for throwing them under the bus. Let's go to the next question. And this is about FAA requirements about broadcast equipment. And y'all show some love to Scott because I didn't see this one coming. Question: when operating a small SUAS under Part 107, which system is used to comply with the FAA requirement for broadcast identification and location information? Now, I've put all 3 questions on screen, not only so that you can see them, but so that way I can explain them. And before I get into this, understand what the question is asking you. It's referring specifically to a drone in regard to broadcast identification and location information. So look at answer A, ADS-B out, automatic dependent surveillance broadcast. And you gotta wonder, who is it that comes up with the wording for these acronyms? It's gotta be the same person who wrote the test, right? But this ADS-B out is not something that you'd be fully aware of because it doesn't have anything to do with drones. In fact, it is prohibited under Part 107. Look at the Code of Federal Regulations. You'll find it on my website. It is Part 107.52. ADS-B broadcast equipment is only used on manned aircraft for position reporting to air traffic control and other aircrafts. So don't worry about trying to put this broadcast equipment on your drone. It's not allowed. Let's move down to C, ATC radar beacon system, transponder mode CS. Now, this is also broadcast equipment for a manned aircraft. And basically, it's a transponder that has different modes, A, C, or S. For example, if air traffic control tells you that you need to squawk ident, that means that you need to enable transponder mode A for your identity with a 4-digit squawk code. Transponder mode C is an encoded pressure altitude for altitude reporting, and transponder mode S stands for selective mode with a unique ICAO address and data link feature. And all of this technical information doesn't have anything to do with drones. So obviously the correct answer here is B, remote identification, remote ID. Question number 22, NOTAMs and obtaining information. Now I'm going to post a question on screen, but before I actually read this question, let me ask you another question. What exactly are NOTAMs? Don't you think you'd want to explain that if your 5-year-old asked you that same question? Daddy, what is a NOTAM? Well, son, I don't know them. Well, nobody know them. A NOTAM is basically an official advisory that's issued by the FAA, and its primary purpose is to provide information to alert pilots of time-sensitive changes or hazards that have not yet been published on charts or any other publications for that matter. I want you to think of a NOTAM as a breaking news bulletin. All pilots, beware, MikeSytes is going to be flying everywhere. But it's not a broadcast or something printed. It's an electronic notice, and there are several ways that a pilot can retrieve these notices. But in regard to the Part 107 question, do you notice how it's only pointing to a remote pilot in command? Well, this is also a subtle trick, because just as a pilot of a manned aircraft, essentially a remote pilot has the same access. So there are several ways for any pilot to retrieve these NOTAMs, so all of the answer choices would be correct. And if I throw a letter D for all of the above, then that's what you would choose. Now, some of you are probably asking an underlying question as, why is this useful for drones? Well, even if you're flying under 400 feet, there are some TFRs, temporary flight restrictions, that are in effect for all aircrafts down to the surface. And this means that if you're trying to conduct an operation that you can't fly at any altitude, where are you going to find this critical information so that way you don't get into any trouble? You guessed it. Use the Before You Fly app, go to the FAA website, or you can even call 1-800-XW-BRIEF and speak with a briefer, and they'll give you all of the information you need. Next question, number 23, is about FAA reporting damage to property. Now, here's the question. While operating under Part 107, your drone causes damage estimated at exactly $500. are you required to report this incident? Now, believe it or not, this is a question that I put in the quizzes on my channel post. And the reason I decided to put this question on the video is because 67% of you answered this question incorrectly. Only 33% of you got it right. So here's the breakdown, and commit this to memory. If you damage someone's property and you go over $500, for example, the property damage equals $500.01. It has to go over $500. So if it's exactly $500, you do not need to report it to the FAA. But if it is over $500, that's when you need to report it. So since this is exactly $500 worth of damage, the correct answer is B, no, because the damage must be greater than $500. Number 24, aircraft factors load factor during flight. And this was also on my quiz, and 25% of you answered incorrectly. So here it is. When operating an unmanned airplane, the remote pilot should consider that the load factor on the wings may be increased anytime. Now, I'm putting the answers on screen so you can see them, but what I want to do is to give you an example so that way you'll know exactly how to answer this question. So think about this. You're driving in your car and your body feels pretty normal, right? Nothing stressful, but there are times when you do feel that pressure on your body on one side and you do feel the pressure on your body on the other side. Isn't that right? Why is that? Go ahead, answer the question for yourself. You know the answer. It's because you're making a turn. Whenever you make a turn, left or right, your body feels more weight. It feels more pressure. Well, that's load factor, and it's very similar to an aircraft. And didn't I just give you the answer? Whenever a plane is flying straight and level, there is no load factor, there's no pressure. But when the aircraft is making a maneuver, a banked left turn, or descending, or it's climbing, then there is pressure, or what's called load factor, on the aircraft. So the correct answer is B. Load factor increases whenever it is that the airplane is subject to maneuvers other than just staying on a straight and level flight. Now, let me just give you a break just for a moment so you can ring that notification bell so you can get the updates on my videos. Question number 25, sectional chart symbols. This is about airspace altitudes. And let's put up a question that you've probably never seen before. Turn to figure 74 area 6 on your Airman Knowledge Testing supplement. So let me read the question. There are designations that provide Class C ceiling data with the letter T over a numerical indicator. For example, T over SFC and T over 15. And the question here is, what does the symbol T represent in regard to the class of airspace? And I'm sure that you've probably never seen this question before, but here it is. The symbol that we're referring to on the sectional chart is the letter T over a number, or the letter T over SFC. And just so you know, the letter T in FAA shorthand means top or ceiling. So let's go and check the Aeronautical Chart User's Guide to see exactly what that means. And you'll be able to access this guide directly from the MikeSytes.com website. It'll be page 16 in the supplements section. So looking at the information that the FAA provided, you see T over SFC on the left. Well, you know that SFC stands for surface, and the top or the ceiling value of the letter T indicates the ceiling is to, well, they should have said up to, but not including the floor of the overlying Class B airspace. So to sum it up concisely, T actually means the ceiling up to but not including. Let's go back to the sectional chart to see what's going on. Now, I want you to pay attention to Metropolitan Oakland International Airport. Do you see it's starting at the surface, but where is the T actually going up to? Well, that's very simple. All you need to do is to determine the floor of the Class B airspace directly above. And what is it? Did you find it? There it is. 2,100 feet MSL is the floor of Class B airspace. So the T, if you remember, is going to go up to, but not including the altitude of the floor of Class B airspace directly above. And since all of those T symbols have the same Class B airspace layer directly above, then that means all of the T symbols will be 2,099 feet MSL that they will go up to, but not including the altitude of the Class B airspace directly above. And remember, this T symbol only applies to Class C airspace. So if you were asked this question on the Part 107 exam to determine the ceiling of the Class D airspace with the symbol T on it, you would already know how to find that answer. The correct answer is C, 2,099 feet MSL. Okay, so for the next 11 questions, you're going to need to answer these by yourself. This is going to give you some practice in finding the answers. You'll need to use your Airman Knowledge testing supplement for some of these questions. At the end of this segment, I will have all of the answers so you can grade your score. Now, what you're shooting for is an 80% correct answers. Of course, we have a higher standard than the FAA, right? And what that means is that you're only allowed to miss 2. Are you ready? Here we go. Okay, so answers are coming up on screen. You should be able to gauge how well you did. And this is good practice for you because when you're taking the Part 107 exam, you will have to answer these questions independently without anyone helping you. But you know that I'm always here to help you, so you can post a comment if you have any concerns about the questions on this video. Now, the goal here was for you to get at least 9 of these correct for an above 80 score. But if you got 8 of them correct, then that would have still put you in a 72%. You would have still passed. But as you know, you must always aim high. This channel is about 100% pass, and I'm going to try to do my best to get you the highest score possible. Let's move to the next question, number 37. Categories, operations over people. And as you see, I'm posting a question on screen. Which category of small unmanned aircraft must have an airworthiness certificate issued by the FAA? Now, a good question to ask is, what are categories and what exactly is an airworthiness certificate? The categories that that they're referring to in the question have to do with flying over people. This is Part 107, subsection D. And there are 4 categories. Categories 1 through 4. 1 meaning for small drones. 2 meaning for drones that are over 0.55 pounds. Category 3 allows for drones that are up to 25 foot-pounds of kinetic energy on impact. And Category 4 for the industrial, larger, experimental type of drones. And all of these categories have to do with flying over people. But there is only one category that requires this airworthiness certificate that you're looking at right now. So in regard to remembering this answer, I want you to think about this. All planes, no matter what planes they are, because they're so big, all of them require an airworthiness certificate. There is not one plane in flight that does not require an airworthiness certificate. So logically, if you're looking at categories 1 through 4, and you know that 4 has the larger drones, then that must be the only one that requires an airworthiness certificate, and that is the answer. All of the other categories do not require an airworthiness certificate from the FAA. Question number 38 is for remote identification. There will be a lot of questions on the exam in regard to this topic. Now, here's the question. What must a person who is manipulating the controls of a small unmanned aircraft do if the standard remote identification fails during flight? Now, let's go over the answers. Could it be A, notify air traffic control and the FAA air traffic facility? Now, think about this for a second. Out of the 50 million people in the United States that fly drones, do you think for 1 minute that ATC or the FAA are going to be picking up those phones? Not likely, huh? Let's move to the next question. B, land the aircraft as soon as practically possible. Now, that sounds like a safe bet, don't you think? Let's go to C, use GPS for the aircraft's navigation. And we know that answer won't work because you see the hint that I'm giving you says that RID must be broadcasting at all times. This is an FAA rule. So the only correct answer choice here will be B, land the aircraft as soon as practically possible. Now, question number 39 is about weather thunderstorms again, and this is an important part of the Part 107 exam. Which thunderstorm life cycle stage is most likely characterized by downdrafts? If you've watched my other videos, then you already know the answer to this question. And you see that I'm throwing a hint up on screen. Updrafts are usually present in a thunderstorm in the developing stage, and that's going to be the cumulus stage. The second stage is going to be the mature stage, which has updrafts and downdrafts, but the last stage, which is the dissipating stage, has primarily only downdrafts. And the way that I remember this is that that's when the storm is dying down. So there are only downdrafts that are present. Use the power of association when it's time to remember those key points, okay? Let's move to the next question. Number 40, airport traffic. This is about runway orientation. Now, I want you to pay attention to this question because this is where you're going to lose your focus when you're taking the exam. An aircraft announces left downwind of runway 16. This means that the aircraft is on a heading of... Now, you see I've posted the answers, right? A through C. But here's the thing. Most of you are going to say it's 160 degrees because you're thinking about 16 and then you just add a 0. That is not what the question is telling you. You see, you have to focus on the question. It is saying that they are left downwind, and that means that they're traveling in the opposite direction of the runway. So what do you do to solve this problem? Easy. You simply add 180 degrees to 160 degrees, and that will give you your answer. But me giving you the answer, just like everyone else would, is not enough. I need to explain this to you so you understand this in detail. In the question, the pilot broadcasted that they were left downwind of runway 16. And if you notice in the diagram that I just put up that the orientation of the runways sort of seems as though it's upside down, right? Because 160 degrees should be at the bottom and 340 degrees should be at the top. Am I right? Both of these runways in regard to angles and directions are exactly 180 degrees away from each other. And did you pay attention to how I said both of these runways? Literally, there's only one physical runway, but for practical applications, there are actually two, 16 and 34. So why is it that these numbers seem to be in the wrong position? And that's probably a question that you are now asking yourself, am I right? Well, let me explain this to you. The numbers on the runway will always correspond to whatever direction the plane is heading towards. Don't ever forget that. If an airplane is supposed to be landing on runway 16, that means it's heading towards 160 degrees. And the question here is, why is the number 16 at the top instead of the bottom? Well, that's a very simple answer. It's because whenever the plane is coming in for a landing, the wheels of that aircraft needs to touch down on the numbers that are corresponding to the direction of the aircraft and also corresponding to the runway designation. So if the wheels of the aircraft touches down on number 16, the aircraft is on runway 16 heading towards 160 degrees. And I want to laugh so hard because I know no one else would explain it to you in that way. You see, the way my brain is wired is by the process of association for memorization. So, for example, if I already know in my head that wherever the nose of that aircraft is pointing to determines the direction in regard to degrees, then there's no way I can answer any one of these questions incorrectly. The plane is traveling or flying downwind of runway 16. That means it's in the opposite direction. So the opposite direction of 160 degrees is 340 degrees. Moving on to question 41, a sectional chart question for allowable altitude. So turn to figure 20, area 1, and the question is, you're hired to inspect a group of structures that are under construction 6 statute miles south of Norfolk International Airport. What is the highest you're allowed to fly without needing authorization? Now, the reason that I chose this question was because one of the most difficult things for you to do is to determine how to measure 6 statute miles on a sectional chart. But here's the correction that you need to know. Airports in miles are not measured in statute miles, they're measured in nautical miles. The only thing that's measured in statute miles are weather reports and visibility. And you will find some online paid courses that will wrongly use statute miles instead of nautical miles. Let's go take a look at the sectional chart to see what we can find. And we're looking for obstructions or structures that are under construction approximately 6 nautical miles south of Norfolk International Airport, and there they are. Do you see them? Pointing to the letters UC, which stands for under construction, gives me confirmation that those structures, which are about 6 nautical miles from the airport, are the ones that I need to be concerned with. And the second part of that question was for me to determine how high I can possibly fly, or the highest I can fly without authorization. And I can clearly see that this structure extends up to 453 feet AGL. The top number will be for MSL. So the correct value that I'm hoping to find in my multiple choice answers should be 400 feet above whatever it is that I'm seeing in my multiple choice answers. Let's go back and look at them. And it's obvious that there's only one correct answer because only one is referenced in AGL and only one has 400 feet above 453 feet AGL for the structure. Okay, let's move on to question number 42, airport operations, and this is for air traffic patterns. And I'll read the question. While monitoring Cooperstown CTAF, you hear an aircraft announce that they are midfield left downwind of runway 13. Where would the aircraft be relative to the runway? Now, for some of you who have been practicing for a while, you already know the answer, but there are others who do not know exactly what this means. So what I do is to draw everything out on a piece of paper. So you can see that I'm trying to establish compass settings by degrees, 0, 90, 180, and 270. And since I know that the question has runway 13 in it, well, I know that that's going to be 130 degrees approximately. Now, the opposite direction of 130 degrees is going to be 130 degrees plus 180 degrees, and that will give me 310 degrees. And you'll be able to do the same exact thing while you're taking the Part 107 exam. Just take your time and get your bearings. And now that I have those two positions by degrees, I'll just draw the runway directly over it. And to give it a sense of realism, well, I'll go ahead and draw the runway markings on it also. But you don't have to do that. I'm just trying to show off my artistic abilities. Now, if I were to indicate the runway designations as they should be, 13 would be at the very top, and the runway designation at the bottom would be 31. And it seems a little backwards, doesn't it? But it's not, because the plane is heading at 130 degrees. And at the very bottom, if you see how I'm drawing my arrow, the plane is heading at 310 degrees. And always remember that runway designation estimations will be based upon what direction the aircraft is heading. And just to be a little more precise, I'm going to draw an A for where the airport actually is located. So in the question, the pilot announced midfield left downwind of runway 13. So I'm going to draw the plane, and you should understand that the plane will be making left-hand turns in order to land on runway 13. And the last part of the question is, where would the aircraft be in relation to the runway? And you can see very clearly that the aircraft is east of the airport. And now if we go back to the question, it says here, where would the aircraft be in relation to the runway? You already know this answer. It is the aircraft is east of the airport. Answer A. Next question, number 43, sectional charts, airport data. And here's the question. Refer to figure 76. What is the CTAF frequency at Prairie Regional Airport, PIR? And what you should get into the habit of doing is not looking at the answers first. Go to the informational data on the sectional chart, find the answer, and then come back to the answers, multiple choice questions, simply to confirm what it is that you already know. So here's the airport's informational data. You can see it on screen. And there are quite a few frequencies indicated here, all of which are meant to confuse you. There's 119.025, there's 122.95, there's 122.7, there's 122.2, and there's also 122.5 channel 72 PIR. So the question here is, do you know which one of those frequencies is the CTAF frequency? And just so you know, CTAF stands for Common Traffic Advisory Frequency, and it's what the pilots use to communicate back and forth with each other since there's no control tower at this airport. And you'll know the CTAF frequency because it will always have the symbol C just to the right of it, 122.7. And since you now know how to find the CTAF frequency, do you know now how to find the correct answer for this question? Of course, it's B. 122.7 is the CTAF frequency. Next question, number 44, sectional charts, military training routes. And let's read the question. Refer to figure 21. What type of military flight operations should a pilot expect along IR 644 in the Devil's Lake West MOA? And in case you don't know what an MOA is, it stands for Military Operations Area. Now, MOAs are not restricted. You can still fly through, but you need to exercise caution because there are military training activities, and you don't want your poor little drone to be hit by an aircraft that was flying 250 knots at low altitude. So let's take a look at the sectional chart and locate Devil's Lake West MOA. You see it on the right here as indicated with the red hash mark boundaries. And inside of that MOA is a military training route as indicated by that gray line that you see. It says IR 644-649. Now, anytime you see a military training route, you need to be able to interpret what those letters and numbers actually mean. IR means the pilots are using instruments, and VR means the pilots are flying visually. Now, if you see 3 numbers following, that means that the flights are above 1,500 feet AGL. And if you see 4 numbers following those letters, that means the flights are below 1,500 feet AGL. And the way that I remember this by association is knowing that the 3 numbers stand for the 3 letters sky, and the 4 numbers stand for the 4 letters down. So since this military training route, which is inside of this MOA, has 3 numbers, that means that the training exercises are being conducted above 1,500 feet AGL. So going back to the question and answers, you can clearly see that the choice that you're going to select on the Part 107 exam will be A, IFR training flights above 1,500 feet AGL at speeds greater than 250 knots. Now let's have another quick 10-question quiz so that way you can do this by yourself independently. And at the end of this section, I will have the answers up so you can grade your score. Remember, you're shooting for an 80% or better, so that means you can only miss 2. So here we go. Now, the last 5 questions that you're going to see are going to be specifically on remote ID. Question number 56, remote ID broadcast information. What specific information is not required to be broadcast by a standard remote ID drone? Now, the question itself is giving you the answer because it specifically mentions a standard remote ID drone. It doesn't say anything about the pilot or certification number for Part 107. Remote ID is meant to broadcast location, altitude, speed, and also the serial number of the drone. So the correct answer is C. It is not required to broadcast the pilot's FAA Part 107 certification number. Question 57, remote ID broadcast information. And the question is, what performance requirements must the remote ID broadcast module meet regarding message timing and frequency? Now, I know a lot of you are probably saying, what just happened? Because you've never seen this question before. It's not on the FAA study guides. It's not on any YouTube videos other than this one. The paid online courses don't have this question, but yet this is something that you may see on the FAA exam, and you'll be asking yourself, why did they put this question on the exam and I've never seen this before? This is the frustrating part of not being able to achieve a perfect score, but we're getting closer and closer. Let's take a look at the answers. A, broadcast the full message once every 10 seconds on FM 107. You think that could be the answer? Well, I don't know. Let's go to B. Broadcast the complete RID data every 1.0 seconds on 2.4 gigahertz. Well, maybe that's the answer. I don't know. Let's go to C. Broadcast RID every 5 seconds on frequency 1 to 2.9 megahertz. Now, regardless, this is not an easy question because we never had anything like this to study from. And the FAA will throw a question in on the Part 107 exam such as this, knowing that they never gave us any material such as this to study from. So what you'll need to do is to go to the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 89, Remote Identifications for Unmanned Aircraft. And as you can see, there's quite a bit of reading here, and they will pick something out of this rat's nest and then throw it on a Part 107 exam, expecting you to know what the answer is. Well, anyway, what I'm looking for is subpart 89.320. I should find it. And that's because the question is referring to the minimum standards for a remote ID module. So here it is, 89.320, minimum performance requirements for remote identification broadcast modules. That's what the question is referring to. So if I scroll down a little bit, sections 5 and 6 are giving me the information that I need, and it will be under Message Elements Performance Requirements. Let me read 5 to you. The remote identification broadcast module must broadcast the latitude, longitude, and geometric altitude of the unmanned aircraft no later than 1.0 seconds from the time of measurement to the time of broadcast. And number 6 is saying the remote ID broadcast module must broadcast the message elements at a rate of at least 1 message per second. Now you see, if I just touch on 5, it's giving me the information in regard to where the statute is located. But my point is that we're not going to law school trying to pass a bar exam. We're just trying to figure out how to pass the Part 107 exam. And this information is good information. It's not need-to-know information, but it may be a crucial question for you in regard to passing the Part 107 exam. And going back to the question now, you can see that it's also asking you for the frequency. Well, you wouldn't know that either unless someone told you or you read it somewhere, right? But I'm going to tell you. You see, remote ID broadcast depends on the transmission method. So for example, it could be either Wi-Fi broadcast modules, or it could be Bluetooth low-frequency BLE modules. Now, both of these will use a 2.4 gigahertz frequency. And since I just told you that, you should already know what the correct answer is now. B, broadcast the complete RID data every 1.0 seconds on 2.4 gigahertz. Let's go to the next question, number 58, remote ID FAA recognized identification area. In case you don't know what that is, that stands for FRIA. So let's go over the question. Which type of remote ID is permitted for flight inside of an FAA recognized identification area, FRIA? Question mark. Now, before I show you the answers, let me ask you, do you know what a FRIA actually is? Well, let me explain it to you. A FRIA is a place where you can fly a drone or an unmanned aircraft, and broadcasting remote ID is not required. But the question is asking you what type of remote ID is allowed to fly within a FRIA. And before you can even think about answering this question, you need to know what type of remote IDs there are. So first, there is a standard broadcast remote ID, and there is a remote ID module, which is an external device that attaches onto the drone. Standard means that it's built in. Module means that it's an external device that transmits remote ID. So now that you know the two types, let's go over the answers to see which one or both is permitted inside of an FAA recognized identification area FRIA. A, standard remote ID only. B, both standard remote ID and broadcast module remote ID. Or C, no remote ID required while inside of a FRIA. So here's the 411, the information that has not been provided to you. You see, whenever it is that you're flying in a FRIA and your drone is already equipped with a built-in standard remote ID, it's not only permitted that you can broadcast remote ID within the FRIA, but you must broadcast remote ID within a FRIA. Now, how about a remote ID module? Well, here's the thing. If you bring those deck of cards to the table, then you have to play. That means that if your remote ID is already registered with the FAA, then you must broadcast a signal from that external remote ID module, regardless of whether you're flying in or out of a FRIA. Now, here's the thing to remember. Most new drones today will have standard remote ID built in, but for those older drones that do not, then you'll be able to fly in a FRIA without needing to have remote ID. The minute that you purchase a remote ID module and then register it with the FAA, you need to broadcast remote ID inside of that FRIA. So the answer to this question will be B. Both standard remote ID and broadcast module remote ID will be permitted to fly in an FAA recognized identification area or FRIA. Question number 59, remote ID again, broadcast information. And here is the question. Which frequency bands are remote ID broadcast required to use? These are questions that you would not necessarily consider as being on the Part 107 exam, right? But they're tricky. They're going to try to see if they can screw you up by not giving you a perfect score. And if you remember in the last question that we had that I mentioned, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, keep that in your head when it's about remote ID, because those are the type of frequency bands that will be compatible with smartphones, tablets, and whenever it is that they want to check up on you to make sure that you're broadcasting a remote ID, well, guess what? They'll be walking up to you with a cell phone in their hand and saying, "We don't see you." Wi-Fi or Bluetooth frequency, the correct answer here is B. And now we come to the last question, number 60, remote ID, FRIA eligibility and requirements. And here's the question. Under FAA remote ID regulations, who is eligible to apply for an FAA recognized identification area, or FRIA? And what they're asking is, if you wanted to establish a place where people could fly without remote ID, who would be eligible and who would qualify for being able to establish a FRIA? And I'm displaying the answers on screen so you can make the appropriate choice. Now, take your best guess if you don't know this answer, but some of you who have studied already know what the correct answer is. I'm not going to tell you right away because I want you to think about the correct answer. And do you notice how all of these are very challenging because it makes it seem as though all of them are correct, right? But there can only be one correct answer, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you what it is. Let's go to A, any individual recreational flyer who owns land suitable for model aircraft flying. Now, I'm going to tell you something. I have never heard an answer that ridiculous, because owning land doesn't have anything to do with FAA approval. But there is something that has to do with FAA approval, right? C, commercial drone operators with a valid Part 107 certificate. Now, do you think that could be it? Well, the answer is no, that's not it. Because the reason that you're becoming a certified remote pilot is so that way you can fly with remote ID. And by process of elimination, you see you're left with answer B, FAA recognized community-based organizations, or they're called CBOs, and educational institutions. Those are the ones that can qualify and apply to be a FRIA. And now that we've answered all of these questions, you are now free to go ahead and pass the Part 107 exam with flying colors. And if you have any questions, you know you can always post a comment. I'll do my best to answer. Until then, I'll see you on the next one. Good luck on the exam.